Have you ever been pushed so far that you finally decide to fight back? That moment when the people who were supposed to respect your property cross the line and try to take away something that belongs to you? Well, that's exactly what happened to me when my homeowners association thought they had the right to rip apart my cabin porch. From the very beginning, I knew living under an HOA wasn't easy. They love power, they love rules, and they love controlling people who just want to live in peace. But I never expected things would get this crazy. Crazy enough that the sheriff would eventually show up and seize their vehicles. But let me take you back to where it all started. It was a quiet morning. The kind of morning where you want to sit outside with coffee, breathe fresh air, and thank the world for letting you live in peace. My porch was my favorite place. I built it myself with my own hands. Every nail, every board, every inch of it told my story. It wasn't just wood. It was memories. It was where my kids played when they were little, where my friends laughed during summer nights, and where I found comfort after hard days. But the HOA didn't see it that way. To them, it wasn't a porch. It was a violation, a problem, an unauthorized structure. Weeks before the real showdown, I started receiving letters. Each one was nastier than the last. The first one said, "Remove the porch within 30 days." The second one said, "Final warning. You are in violation of HOA regulations." And then came the third, stamped in bold red. "Legal action will be taken." Legal action? Over a porch? My porch? That's when I knew they weren't bluffing. The HOA board had always been power hungry. They acted like kings, walking around with clipboards, inspecting homes like prison guards. They had a taste for control, and once they spotted something they didn't like, they latched on and refused to let go. Neighbors told me, "Just take it down. It's not worth the fight." But here's the thing. They weren't the ones who built it. They weren't the ones who sat on that porch at night, listening to crickets and staring at stars. I wasn't going to let some paper pushers steal that from me, so I stood my ground. I wrote back, "This is my private property. My porch is staying. If you want it gone, you'll have to come take it yourselves." And that's exactly what they tried to do. One afternoon, I heard the sound of trucks rolling into the neighborhood. I looked outside and saw 3 HOA members with contractors. They had ladders, hammers, power tools, everything they needed to rip apart what I had built. I stormed outside, heart pounding, and yelled, "What do you think you're doing?" One of them smirked and said, "We're here to remove the unauthorized porch. It violates the community design standards." I couldn't believe it. They actually had the nerve to show up like it was their property. I stood between them and my porch and told them, "You're not touching a single board, not one nail." They argued. They threatened. They said the police were on their side. But here's the truth. Property rights are powerful. And in that moment, I knew the law wasn't against me. It was against them. Still, they refused to back down. They circled the porch, measuring it, pointing, shaking their heads like judges in a courtroom. They kept saying, "This is non-compliant. This will be removed. You've been warned." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Say that again," I told them. "Tell the camera what you're about to do." Suddenly, their confidence began to crack. HOA bullies thrive in the shadows, but when you shine a light on them, they start to squirm. One of them whispered, "Turn the camera off." I didn't. The fight stretched on for hours. Neighbors came out, curious, whispering to each other, watching the drama unfold. Some cheered me on. Others shook their heads, convinced I was about to lose everything. But here's where things took a wild turn. The HOA called in reinforcements. They tried to claim trespassing authority. They even said they had the right to enter my property without permission. That's when I made the call that changed everything. I dialed the sheriff's office. "Sheriff," I said, "the HOA is on my property with contractors. They're trying to tear down my porch. I didn't give them permission. I need help now." Within 20 minutes, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The HOA members froze like deer in headlights. The sheriff got out, calm but firm. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. The HOA rushed to speak first. "This homeowner is in violation. This porch isn't allowed. We're here to enforce community rules. The sheriff turned to me. "Sir, is this your property?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Did you give them permission to be here?" "No." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He looked at the HOA like they were reckless kids caught breaking into a house. "Then you're trespassing." That's when the tables turned. The HOA members tried to argue, waving their papers and rules in the sheriff's face. But the sheriff didn't care about their power trips. He cared about the law. And the law was crystal clear. Private property means private property. The sheriff warned them. "If you don't leave immediately, I'll have no choice but to seize your vehicles and charge you with trespassing." They laughed at first, thinking he was bluffing. But he wasn't. He called for backup. And within minutes, tow trucks rolled in. The sight was unforgettable. Big tow trucks hooking up the shiny SUVs of the HOA members. Their faces went pale. Their arrogance melted into panic. Suddenly, the mighty rulers of the neighborhood were powerless, begging for mercy as their cars were hauled away. Neighbors gasped. Some even clapped. Others filmed on their phones. It was a spectacle. David beating Goliath right in front of everyone's eyes. And as the sheriff wrote up citations, he turned to me and said, "You were right to stand your ground. No one has the right to come onto your property and destroy what's yours without legal authority." In that moment, I felt a wave of relief. Not just because my porch was safe, but because the truth had finally won. But let me tell you something. The story didn't end there. The HOA wasn't done. They may have lost their vehicles, but they weren't going to stop plotting. And in Section 2, I'll tell you exactly how they tried to strike back, how the fight escalated even further, and how justice finally came crashing down on our empire control. So stick with me, because the battle against the HOA wasn't over yet. Backhand index pointing right. If you think no one should be able to bully you off your own property, share this story. Stand with me, and don't forget to watch the next part, because it only gets crazier from here. You'd think that after the sheriff showed up, seized their vehicles, and humiliated them in front of the entire neighborhood, the HOA would have learned their lesson. You'd think they'd back off, swallow their pride, and finally let me live in peace. But no, bullies don't just give up. When you embarrass them, they get even more desperate. And my HOA, they weren't just desperate, they were furious. It started the very next week. I began receiving more letters. Only this time, the tone was darker. They accused me of harassment, defamation, and public disrespect to the HOA board. They demanded I pay fines for interfering with their duties. Can you believe that? They tried to twist the story, like I was the criminal, like I had done something wrong for protecting my own property. But I wasn't falling for their scare tactics. Every letter they sent went straight into a folder I labeled evidence, because I knew one day I'd need to use it. Then came the rumors. Suddenly, neighbors started telling me that the HOA was going door to door, spreading lies about me. They said I was a troublemaker, that I was destroying the community, that I was bringing down property values. It was a classic strategy. When bullies lose in public, they try to poison people behind the scenes. But guess what? Many neighbors didn't buy their story. They had seen what happened. They had watched the sheriff seize those vehicles. And deep down, they knew the truth. The HOA wasn't protecting the community. They were just protecting their egos. The real storm came a month later. One morning, I walked out to get the mail and noticed something taped to my door. It wasn't a regular HOA letter. It was an official-looking document, stamped with a court emblem. A lawsuit. The HOA was actually suing me. They claimed I owed thousands of dollars in fines. They claimed I had broken community bylaws. They claimed I had caused emotional distress to their board members by calling the sheriff. I stood there in shock. They weren't just trying to take my porch anymore. They were trying to take my money, my peace, and maybe even my home. I could have panicked. I could have given up. But instead, I smiled, because I had been waiting for this moment. Remember that folder labeled evidence? It was thick by now. Letters, notices, recordings, witness statements, all neatly stacked and ready. If they wanted to take me to court, fine. But this time, it wouldn't be me on trial. It would be them. The day of the court hearing was unforgettable. The HOA board showed up dressed like royalty, strutting into the courtroom with their lawyer. They smirked at me like victory was already in their hands. But I wasn't alone. I had my attorney. I had neighbors who had seen everything. And most importantly, I had the truth. When the judge asked for my side of the story, I laid it all out. Every letter, every threat, every illegal action. And then I played the video. The courtroom fell silent as the judge watched footage of the HOA trespassing on my property. Contractors with hammers ready, and then the sheriff warning them before seizing their vehicles. The look on the judge's face said it all. The HOA's lawyer tried to spin it. They said, "Your Honor, we were simply enforcing community rules." But the judge cut him off. Community rules do not override state law. They do not override property rights. And they certainly do not allow trespassing or destruction of private property. Boom. Just like that, the hammer came down. Not on me, but on them. The ruling was crystal clear. I didn't owe them a single dime. My porch was perfectly legal, and the HOA had abused their authority. But that wasn't all. The judge ordered the HOA to reimburse me for legal fees. Thousands of dollars straight out of their budget. And if that wasn't enough humiliation, the judge issued a warning. If the HOA ever tried something like this again, their entire board could be dissolved. You should have seen their faces walking out of that courtroom. Red, angry, defeated. The same people who once walked around the neighborhood with clipboards and power trips now looked like children caught stealing candy. I walked out with my head high, neighbors cheering me on, people shaking my hand. And when I got home, I sat on that same porch, the one they tried to rip away from me, and smiled, because justice had spoken. Now, let me tell you something important. This story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever been bullied by an HOA, a boss, or anyone in power who thinks rules give them the right to crush people. Bullies don't stop until someone stands up. And sometimes, standing up means risking everything. But if you stay silent, they win. I stood up. I fought back. And in the end, the sheriff, the judge, and the law stood with me. The HOA thought they could scare me. They thought they could silence me. But instead, they exposed themselves. They showed the entire neighborhood what they really were, power-hungry, arrogant, and reckless. And as word spread, people started questioning everything the HOA did. Why were fees so high? Why were fines handed out like candy? Why did the board act like kings instead of servants? One by one, neighbors started speaking up. They demanded transparency. They demanded accountability. And slowly, the grip of the HOA began to loosen, all because one homeowner said, "No, you're not taking my porch." So here's my message to you. If you're ever pushed into a corner, by an HOA, by a bully, by anyone who thinks they can take what's yours, don't be afraid to fight back. Document everything. Know your rights. And never, ever let fear silence you. Because the moment you stand tall, you'll realize something powerful. Bullies aren't as strong as they pretend to be. They only win when you let them. And as for me, every evening, I sit on my porch with pride. The same porch they tried to destroy. The same porch that became a symbol of resistance. And every time I hear the creak of those boards under my feet, I smile, because it reminds me that freedom is worth fighting for. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe no one should be bullied on their own property, share the story. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And never forget, you have more power than you realize. Because sometimes all it takes is one stand to change everything.